Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedComms and the associated websites, where I'm trying to facilitate discussion and sharing of experience and networking so on amongst the MedComms, the global MedComms community. So by that, I mean people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and anyone who's interested in those businesses. So one of the things we're doing at the moment are running these webinars, which are great. We can involve people from all over the world and covering off a whole load of interesting topics. So I'm absolutely delighted today to have the team from Bit Access. We're talking about engaging with patients, I guess, through the digital platforms, and also importantly, I'm keen to talk about the role of patients and patient groups and advocates and other people as well involved in the publications process in sort of real world studies. I guess that's I find this stuff really interesting. So I'm absolutely delighted that you're all here. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll say no more. I will hand over to Mark to lead the way, but what we're going to do is have a presentation and Q&A. So just a quick one to the audience that are here today, please join in using the chat boxes, any questions, observations, comments. But Mark, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Peter. So firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you on this webinar. Hi to everyone who's joined around the world. What we're going to do is I'm going to do some quick introductions. I'll pass around to the other panelists who will introduce themselves pretty quickly. We've got some materials to take you through, which we'll do pretty quickly, actually. What the idea of that is just to provide some context for this discussion, the type of work we do. We want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. Actually, when we talk about this type of work, this type of project that we do, invariably it creates lots of questions from the people who we do it with. So we're pretty hopeful that you, the audience, have plenty of questions for us. So they're all very welcome. So firstly, introductions then. My name is Mark Larkin. I'm the founder and the CEO of a company called Bit Access. We're Oxford-based. Essentially, we do, as you'll see, we'll give you a quick introduction to ourselves, but we do digital real-world evidence studies very collaboratively with patients. That's the main part of our business, but we have health economics and market access heritage as well, if you like. So I'm then going to pass to Sam Llewellyn to give you a quick intro. Over to you, Sam.
Yes, thank you, Mark. So I'm a senior consultant at Bit Access. I've been here since July 2018, and as we'll no doubt come on to in our discussions, similar to Emma, but I'll let Emma introduce herself. I help manage the scientific advisory board for one of our digital registry studies. So we'll come on to what that means in a bit, but yeah. And then Emma.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, I'm Emma Bagshaw. I'm a senior medical writer here at Bit Access, and I lead our writing and editing team. My role spans across both our digital studies and our standalone consulting work. So in the digital studies, I'm there providing input on the content right through from when we are devising the protocol through to creating apps that participants use in our studies, the content for those, and then leading on to the publications output at the end. So I think, yeah, that sums up what I do. I'll hand over to Fulvio. Oh, sorry, Fulvio, I think you're on mute. Someone's got to do it at some point.
Yeah, okay. I'm not familiar with your work. I am a scientist, but at the moment I am involved in the European Myasthenia Gravis Association, which is an association that collects European-based association and a national association working on myasthenia gravis. And I have been involved in this project since the beginning as a member of the scientific advisory board. And I have little more to add to this. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks everyone. So I'm going to pass back to Sam, who's going to start taking you through some of these materials. And broadly, as you'll see, is a quick introduction to us and our company. Then we're going to show you a case study, actually. Hopefully we'll bring a load of this, this work to life. Sam?
Yep, so hopefully you can see the screens now, Mark. And yeah, you just let me know as and when you want me to move on. Is that right?
Yeah, so look, a quick intro to our company then. So, you know, we've got essentially we do these digital real world evidence studies. We've got a platform to do that, but we also have various other skill sets in-house that enable us to do them faster and very adaptively, actually, and flexibly. We find that particularly with feedback from patients as they develop, it's important to be able to react to that, and adapt the studies on that basis. So being able to have the consulting, so HER market access, analytics, not just the data, but turning that into evidence, localization, being able to do that in any country, in any language. That's pretty important. So carry on to the next one then. So yeah, we'll try and get through this pretty quickly, but yeah, we've got this platform called Vitaxis Real that we use as the basis for doing these studies. And essentially it gives us device agnostic data capture. So not just iPhones, not just Android, but all of those, tablets, PCs. So that's important actually, because we can be inclusive. We don't want to exclude any patients, particularly if you work in things like rare diseases. That's the last thing you want. You want as many patients as possible. And on the right, you see data dashboards. So we can get the data out in real time, which is really powerful for exploring subgroups, comparing cohorts, etc. And crucially, shortening the time from when a patient generates some data to getting through to publications. The next one. Okay, so I'm not going to take you through this in detail, but as I said, we can cover all the aspects from the design of the studies, patient advocacy groups, as you see on the left, and patients and onboarding, all the way through to the publication. But it's actually, as you'll see, quite an iterative step. There's a whole range of time points at which we get input from patients and patient advocacy groups. And broadly, maybe you won't be surprised to hear that the more of that you can do, the better. And it might be tempting to say, well, actually, we just need to launch really quickly. But actually, if you miss out some of that, that's probably going to be a mistake in the long run. So really valuable to get that feedback and to do that testing. Go to the next one. So yeah, look, just to give you an understanding of the platform, I've said it's device and OS agnostic. We can also recruit in different ways. We can recruit by sites traditionally. We can recruit directly via patient advocacy groups, which can be very fast and very cost effective actually as well. We can do hybrids of the two. And now increasingly, it's not just about data from patients, for instance, also caregivers. We can do that. We've got some really nice experience there. And of course, we can get data directly from clinicians. On the platform, it's important to recognize that different studies have different characteristics. So platform's flexible, so you can use different modules depending on the result, the structure of the study, which again is really important because that enables you to give a really strong user experience. So that we have to remember that the heart of this is the patient. If they don't find it easy, if they don't find it clear, you have no data, you have no study. So being able to tailor is really important. And then finally, the output, as you see, research portal with interactive dashboards. So moving on. Yeah, I'm going to go on to a case study. So I'll hand over to someone else to carry on from that and give you an example, very nice case study in myasthenia gravis, which we've been having the pleasure of working with Fulvio on, among others.
Okay. Should I go on?
Sure. Do you want to carry on, Emma?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sam, could you move on the slide one, please? Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to tell you a little bit about our My Real World MG study, which is a digital study in myasthenia gravis. So myasthenia gravis is a chronic neurologic condition that causes severe muscle weakness. So the study is being sponsored by Argenx, which is a biotech company based primarily in Belgium. They've also got a large presence in the US as well. And they came to us asking for a study to learn more about the real world patient impact of the condition. So they are launching a product imminently for myasthenia gravis, or MG, but there's very little out there in the published literature about the patient burden of MG, particularly from the patient's perspective themselves. So they came to us to help them to build up that evidence about what impact the condition has on people, their caregivers, their daily lives. So if you'd like to learn a bit more about the study, you can see here there's a link at clinicaltrials.gov, which you can read in detail about the kinds of outcomes that we're collecting, the details of the study. But in brief, it's a community recruited observational real world evidence study with electronic informed consent and IRB ethics approval. So in simple terms, we recruit people via patient advocacy groups and via word of mouth, via social media. So that's the community recruited element of it. It's been really important for us to get patient advocacy groups involved right from the start. They've been involved in the study design and providing input into how to go about recruitment, what kinds of recruitment messaging is likely to appeal to participants. So they help us to communicate with people who are in their networks to get them interested in the study. If people are interested, it's open to anyone who has MG, who's an adult in any of the scope countries. So you'll see below that's US, Canada, Japan, and a range of European countries. So anyone who's interested can download the My Real World MG app from the app stores, check that they meet the eligibility criteria, and then they complete an informed consent within the app itself. Once they've done that, they can register for the study. And the general basis of the study is that it's open for about 2 years. And over that 2-year period, participants complete a series of questions and surveys about themselves and their MG. So we'll go into detail on the next slide about what kinds of data we actually collect. But in principle, it's a background profile about the person themselves, their MG to date, and then we follow them across the course of the study to track any changes in their MG, their treatments, and the impact of the condition on their daily activities and their quality of life. So you'll see here, we're hoping to get about 2,000 adults into the study over the course of the 2-year period. So that's across all of our scope countries. To date, we've got about 1,600. So we're doing really well. Oh, Mark's just in there. It goes up every time we look. So it's now over 1,700 because we've recently launched the study in France. So I think we've got a boost of participants who've just joined us from that country. But yeah, recruitment has been going really well. We've got a lot of interested people and a lot of people who continue to provide data over the course of the study. So we're getting that longitudinal data, which is obviously really important. In terms of governance of the study, I mentioned briefly that it's been important for us to co-develop the study with patient input. So we've worked very closely with patient advocacy groups and key opinion leaders. So the way that we've done this is to establish a scientific advisory board when we first set up the study. And that includes representatives from each of the scope countries. So a patient advocacy representative and a key opinion leader from each study, from each country. We brought them together at the start and they've been involved the whole way through. So they provided input on the protocol, on the app content, what outcomes we should collect, how we should be asking questions, how we should go about recruitment. And then more recently, as the data started to come in, what data are valuable to publish, where we should be publishing, how, and they provided input on the publications themselves, which we'll go into in a bit more detail on a later slide. At this point, I'd like to hand you over to Fulvio, who, as he mentioned when he was introduced, represents the EU MGA on our scientific advisory board. So he is able to give you a bit of a perspective of how the SAB works from a member's point of view. So Fulvio, if you're happy, I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you, Emma. Associations are playing an important role in the project because they did not only collaborate in setting up the study and making interim analysis of the project at the specific time points, but also the association are actively promoting with their own patients in the country the needs of such important study to be performed. So the patients, when they are providing the data through the app, they are not left alone. But if they want to have some inputs, some support, or some information on how is going the study, the local and national associations, the PAG, are still always available. And so they are a mediator through the needs of the persons involved in the study and what should be implemented in the ongoing study, and just to suggest modification, if possible, in the application and to adapt it in the study. Because if the study will last for, say, 2 years, and the patient will provide data for at least 6 months individually, probably some must be adapted if some new needs will arise in the study, and such as the COVID pandemic information that when we were considering to develop the study, the COVID or the coronavirus was not, of course, having no impact on the disease because the COVID was not here. But nowadays it is relevant also to assess what are the problems due to the COVID in patients that we should keep in mind that they are taking immunosuppressive drugs to treat the disease. I think that I have very little more to add at this point to the discussion. So, Peter or Emma.
Thanks, Fulvio. I'll take over again. Sam, could you move on to the next slide, please? Thanks. So as I mentioned earlier, this slide gives you an overview of the kinds of data that we collect in the study. So I won't go into detail because you can read it yourselves, but the key elements are the different aspects to the types of data that we collect. So when people join the study, we collect sort of on an immediate one-off basis data about themselves and their MG to date. So that's effectively their baseline data. So things about themselves, the characteristics of their MG, how it was diagnosed, what treatments they've received to date, that kind of thing. Then over the course of the study, we have a tracker. So you can think of this as an event log for MG-related events that happen during the course of the study. In this particular study, we asked people to fill it in once a month, and it includes questions about resource use, productivity, treatment changes, side effects, that kind of thing. And then alongside that, we have a range of patient-reported outcomes instruments. So these are effectively surveys about the participants' MG, how it's affecting them in terms of their daily activities, their quality of life, well, you can see here their sort of social lives, their sleep, a range of aspects so that we can try and develop a comprehensive picture of the impact of MG. We present those to participants on a varying basis depending on the PRO itself. So some are monthly, some are every few months. And the idea is that each month, participants will be expected to answer a combination of surveys and tracker that takes about 15 to 20 minutes. They can save things as they go, so it's not too much of a commitment for them. They don't have to do a load of questions all in one go. So it's quite easy for someone to dip in and out and complete the questions. As Fulvio mentioned, we've recently added a survey about the impact of COVID-19 into the study because in our discussions with patients, with KOLs, we found that was an important element to add and to learn more about the impact of COVID on MG, MG on COVID, and how they interact. So thanks, Sam. Could you go to the next one, please? This gives you a very high-level overview of the timeline of the study. So launched back in a long time ago, US and UK 2020, and then we've gradually launched the other countries as we've completed ethics submissions for those and localized the app to each of those countries. We've launched them sequentially, and the study is sort of open for 2 years from the launch in each country. So we've got a couple of milestones here for participant recruitment. You'll see also we have done various analyses in recent months. So we've done one for ISA in the US, a formal interim analysis which took place in June of this year. We're hoping to develop a manuscript based on that interim analysis. The protocol for the study was actually published in BMJ Open in July of this year. And as you can see, moving forward, we have another interim analysis planned. We've also, you'll see there, just launched an adjunct study that is looking specifically at the burden of caregivers. So this is a brief one-off survey study to complement the data that's collected in the main patient-related study. I think that's the key things on that one. So Sam, if you can move on, please. Okay, so because we wanted to talk specifically about involving patients in publications, we've got a couple of slides about that in particular. So with this study, publications work has been developed very collaboratively with patient PAG representatives, clinical experts, and argenx, the study sponsor. So within the SAB that I mentioned earlier, we've got a dedicated publications committee. So that includes a range of PAG reps and KOLs who volunteered to be on the publications committee. They contribute to, they review and they approve the publications plan for the study. So towards the start of the study, once we'd established the goals of the study and the outcomes, we developed a publications plan, which included topics we were likely to want to present or publish on, where and when we thought we could disseminate that information. So this publications committee has contributed to reviewed that, and they continue to do so as that evolves in line with the emerging data and the data from the study evolving. The committee members are also invited to co-author all the study publications. So to date, we've done various abstracts, and as I mentioned, the protocol manuscript. This committee has all been invited to act as co-authors on that. So they're heavily involved in the development of the publications and then obviously review and sign off of those. Because the wider SAB has also played a key role in developing the study design and the ongoing success of the study, we find it's very important to acknowledge the contribution of the wider SAB as well in our publications. So where possible, we do list the SAB in the acknowledgements of any publications that we've done. So you'll see the manuscript that we've published, we've referred to the patient advocacy groups who have helped us in developing the study, because obviously their contribution, without their contributions, the study would look very different if it existed at all. Thanks, Sam. Next slide, please. I think this might be the last one. Then we can have a chat. I see lots of questions coming in, so we'll be able to answer those in a second. Publications output to date. So as I mentioned, we've recently had the study protocol published. So when we first developed the protocol, we started off by submitting abstracts about the study design to various congresses. So these are both international and national ones, primarily focused on clinical conferences. So those related to MG specifically, neurology conferences, I think rare disease conferences as well. So we presented the study design in posters at a lot of conferences throughout 2020. And then following that, we revised the protocol so it's suitable for publication in a journal. We submitted that to BMJ Open, and we're pleased to say that that was published in July of this year. Looking further ahead into the future, we've recently done our first interim analysis for the study, which presents effectively the baseline data. So that's the way that this study works. We're treating baseline as the first data that people enter when they join the study, regardless of where they are in their treatment pathway, I suppose. So it's a summary of baseline demographic and PRO data, which we've submitted and had accepted at several conferences. So we're going to be presenting at AANEM this autumn and at the MGFA conference as well. And the plan is to develop that into a manuscript for publication next year. As we do further interim analyses, so they're planned every 6 months, we'll hope to publish further manuscripts which are looking into specific topics. So this one's a general overall one, and then the plan will be to look at areas such as resource use, symptom burden, quality of life burden, things like that, which align with our study sponsors' overall messaging and aims for the study in terms of where they see gaps in the data and what information they'd like to disseminate. So I think that is everything I'd like to talk to you about in terms of the slides themselves. So thank you for listening to me ramble on there. I do see that we've got some questions coming in. So I'll leave it there. And if we can take a look at the questions and then see what we have there. Sam and Mark,
great,
I think
guys.
you've been keeping track on those.
Yeah. Sorry, if I can just jump in. If that's the end of the presentation, can we just lose the slides then, Sam? Thanks. I think you finished on your contact details, so that was good. And we are getting lots of questions coming in, and we'll try and cover off some of these. Some of them are quite, from my reading of them, some of them we could go into a lot of depth here, and we're not going to be able to. So we're going to skip over some of this, I know. So just to deal with the obvious to begin with. Firstly, the audience members on the day, please use the chat box or the Q&A box to send your questions in. We will capture everything. As I say, we will try and deal with as much as we can in the discussion. I would urge you, particularly those of you with some quite specific questions, maybe to follow up afterwards via LinkedIn or something. I know the guys are all very happy to hear from you. So do please, part of this is trying to make contacts here. So please do follow up, okay? Can I just start with maybe, let's tease this out a little bit, and you guys can guide me as well a little bit, but can we just start at the base level, which I don't want to get bogged down in the sort of the techie level, if you like. I love the idea that, you've got this, platform agnostic approach. Anyone, anywhere can fill something in. It all sounds marvelous. In reality, just out of interest, if we can be honest with each other, how much technical problem is there, or do you find from your patients or whoever the caregivers were in using your apps? And my question on a practical level is, how much support do you actually find you have to give? I'm just curious, because these things sometimes catch people unawares. So Mark, maybe just a fail for that.
I mean, that's a fundamental question for this type of research, of course. So the short answer is usually we don't have, the participants themselves don't need that much support. To make a comparison, I'd compare with how frequently or which members of society use apps in general. Now, that's pretty much all of society. We can talk about the perimeters of that, and there's some age perimeters and certain types of people who don't wish to, but it's pretty consistent. So our goal has been to try and make our study apps as simple and straightforward as possible. And that's obviously where the devil, the simpler you can make it, it's more often it's complicated in the background, but that's the goal. So if you do that, and if you test, and there was another question about testing as well, right, that's really the goal, so people don't need too much support.
Okay, and a question came in very early on about sort of attrition rate. I mean, one of the things about apps is 99% of apps aren't used after they're downloaded, sort of thing. So that's, yes, everyone's sort of got them, but they're not using them. So you've got a real need, and there's obviously an interest in using the app, and I get that, which will push them through that. But how many people start a study? How many people drop off? if again, just be honest about, how fast do people just go, oh, I've had enough of this, or do they stick because there's an incentive for them? I understand that. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I mean, again, we could talk about this one for quite a long time. So firstly, absolutely right, there's attrition in all studies. And we have pretty strong experience of trying to reduce attrition. And you do that in different means. So it could be, and it has one key characteristic is the tools you employ to reduce attrition have to be tailored to the study and the cohort. So you may use different tools to engage with a very young population who has cystic fibrosis versus a far older patient group who has melanoma or cancer diagnosis. Types of things we can do are incentive framework rewards. That could be financial, it could be charitable donations, it could be giving people useful information to help them manage their conditions. So we've got a whole load of different things we've got in the toolbox, but the way to give you the best chance of having the smallest attrition is discussing those with your patients, with the patient advocacy groups, testing them, seeing what works. Because if you don't get it right, you'll get potentially very bad attrition, or you might, even worse, get a situation where you think that those tools are being viewed by the participants in some ways trivializing their indication, right? So there are pitfalls.
Okay. And I guess partly what you're saying is that there's a constant iterative process and you're constantly using the SAB and so on, and everyone's constantly talking to each other and you're trying to keep yourself on track. And I sort of get that. Again, one of the questions, I think it did come in quite early on, but it's one of the things that occurred to me. But there's also several questions about the ethics side of things. And I suggest we don't go too far with this, but you're involving patients, the ethics approvals and so on. I wasn't sure what was the therapy. Can I? Sorry, just go on, you go.
I was just going to say, maybe it'd be helpful if Sam, do you want to just give a quick sort of overview of the type of ethics that goes into these studies?
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, Peter.
No, don't worry.
Yeah, that's all right. So typically ethical approvals managed through a central IRB. So we've sort of been working with a trusted IRB in the US. Salus IRB primarily on this type of study, this type of real world evidence, observational, non-interventional study as part of every project. So including this MG project, we then do sort of an ethics landscaping exercise at the beginning, and actually to tie that into sort of more about what this webinar is about, we will consult with members of the advisory board at the beginning of the study about that sort of stuff. Many of the patient group representatives on the advisory board will have worked on potentially similar research before and had to deal with this themselves. And many of the key opinion leaders are clinicians working at hospitals that have their own ethics committees. And so actually as part of this initial landscaping exercise for ethical approvals, part of that is looking into whether there are any local ethics requirements. If so, can we go to the ethics committee where we have a member of the advisory board? And actually, for quite a few, so for Spain, for example, we found that actually, there's an overarching committee, but actually they encourage you to then seek ethical approval from a hospital where you are working closely with someone. And so that is actually then brilliant that we're already working with a clinician in Spain, for example, and we can use the ethics committee of the hospital that they work at. So we've found that this type of studies seems to get through ethics approval quite relatively easy in the grand scheme of things. And I think that sort of just is attesting to it being more of a lifestyle type of study, and the fact that we come to the ethics we come to the ethics committees saying that we have this advisory board of patient group representatives, clinicians who have reviewed documents for suitability in the population, the country that we're looking to expand into, and I think all of those things really do weigh in.
Okay, sorry, Grace has just picked you up, Sam. When you mentioned central IB, just clarify.
IRB, sorry. So
IRB. So
institutional review board or independent review board.
We just need to be a bit careful with some of the jargon. So please feel free to pick us up in the audience if we're mentioning jargon. What I was going to say was, and again, I want to move on from this a little bit, but some of these questions are around real world studies, and that's just, you know, that's just, there's a whole area in that happens. But with this sort of an approach and digitization and so on, one of my questions was, how do you verify the patient is genuine? I don't know how else to describe it, sort of thing, because I didn't, you know, is there some sort of verification process? Do you understand what I'm saying?
So let me perhaps take that. So again, this depends on the type of recruitment you're doing. If you're doing site-based recruitment, it's typically clinical diagnosis has already been done. If you're doing self-enrolled or community recruitment, there's a range of things that you can do to assess the participants. One is that our analytics team have a range of ways that they potentially filter out outliers. Okay, so you can do, you know, people who say they've got a diagnosis or don't really, and then there's a range of things such as, you know, filters over the long term. So if you're going to do a 2-year study and you're not going to incentivize people, for instance, there's no particular incentive for people to do this, right, over a long period of time. So you might have some interlopers over the first, you know, couple of weeks or something, but if you have a filtering system so that we're only going to include longer term patients, then you have that sort of a bit more certainty with that. Additionally, you can do things like validation studies where you can compare the cohort of your study with a known cohort with a third-party data set, for, you know, CPRD, for instance, in the UK. You don't have, and in other countries, you can maybe even do it, have those linkages which are deterministic. If you're not allowed to do that from an ethics perspective, you can do it probabilistically as well. So there's a whole range of things. One thing to say about, I guess, means of filtering people is that for most things, like even scanning or diagnosis letter, people can fudge those if they wish to. Yeah. So there's no, you know, fail-safe means of doing that.
Okay. I get that. The questions are still coming in here. Jane, just, I don't know if there's a simple answer to this question, but Jane came in with the sort of the, you know, patient data privacy question, you know, and in a few words, can you just, I guess the system is secure, but how do you reassure people that the security of data is paramount, I guess?
Yeah, that, again, there's lots of bits to that. So there's bits about the patients themselves. We found actually, these are scientific studies. Now, although there's a commonality with other apps, i.e. there's an app, you know, when people go through the onboarding for a study, it's very different, the experience. So you have to go through a very detailed informed consent, it tells you all about all the people involved, all the security of the system, etc. And that's not what you find in apps. So it does take more time, but actually plenty of people are reassured by that. There's another sort of related question about how we onboard patient advocacy groups and clinicians, because they have, you know, those types of questions about security are probably their most common ones. So, you know, when we do this, we built the system with gold standard security, you know, we can talk about all of those standards, but those are important questions. And additionally, in addition to the informed consent, the ethical approval, you know, you have to have a little bit of flexibility. So we found in some studies that certain people might say, okay, get all that, but you know what, we want you to move your data center because we think that there's a problem, and we've done that. So a little bit of flexibility, but also having a pretty high level of rigor from the get-go.
Okay. I'm hoping we are. I think we're skipping over some of this stuff, but I think that's in the context we're going to have to. But I would like to move us on to the publication side of it, I suppose, which is what we and you know, maybe Emma and Sam, from your points of view, you know, just talk a little bit about those challenges of the publications, and I'd like to bring Fulvio in as well. How do you involve? Let's be simplistic about this. How do you involve the patients practically? What are the challenges involving patients? Are you involving them in guiding you, or are you involving them as authors? There's maybe a little bit of a distinction there. Just talk a little bit. And again, there's several questions around that you've seen. So just talk a little bit around that aspect of the process, as it were. Emma, go first. Go on.
Thanks. In terms of actual authorship of publications, it's patient representatives from patient advocacy groups who are in our scientific advisory board,
right?
Rather than, say, the participants who are in the studies. The way that participants themselves would be able to contribute, I suppose, is that we do have functions whereby they can provide feedback to us. So if they're interested in seeing particular things, they can submit questions to us. We do also publish data nuggets from the study. So it's snippets of information. For instance, did you know that 60% of people in our study are female, for instance? Just quick pieces of information like that. And they're published via our social media, via the patient advocacy group's social media. So those kinds of information, we can get direct feedback from patients, people who are seeing the social media posts. We can get very live direct feedback about, okay, is this the kind of data that's interesting to them? And that then informs our future output, I suppose. Sam, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, the only other thing I would add, I know something you touched on, Peter, was just about sort of coming up with the topics as well for publications. So sort of linked to what Emma says, is, you know, as part of annual or biannual advisory board meetings. So it will vary depending on the project, but as part of those meetings that the patient advocacy group representatives, you know, will attend those meetings, we're asking them about sort of, you know, hot topics for publications. Are there things that sort of their network are feeding back to them that they want to know more about, or that they feel are, you know, currently underrepresented in the literature? And actually that, you know, that's sort of then a forum to feed back to us. We're working on the publications with the study sponsor. And you know, we've found that really useful. And, you know, for example, on another study that I'm working on that's comparable to the one that we went through here, you know, feedback we had from the patient, from the advisory boards, or from the patient group representatives, was actually, are there any links between the condition and depression? And so actually what we've now done, and we're going to be presenting that at the AANEM conference, is a poster specifically about depression and the incidence of depression in this condition. And, you know, we've got all of this data from the study, the supports that we ask about. You know, we have the EQ5D anxiety depression domain. We ask them about comorbidities. We ask them about medications they take, which includes antidepressants. We've got all of this data available. And then what we're hearing is actually people want to hear about that specifically. And so we can take that forward in terms of publications.
Can I just clarify and just pin you down? Are you involved? I mean, there must be different scenarios out there, but are you often involving patients or patient advocate groups or representatives of as authors, or are the authors tending to be the, I don't know, principal investigator or something? I'm just trying to get a sense of that. You're saying yes, yeah? So
yeah,
you are,
yes.
yeah,
I've got Emma.
as actual authors, yeah? And I'm just slightly curious about that aspect of it, as to what if any challenges there are about involving patients, and whether actually how journals react, journal publishers react, and whether they encourage it in these situations or not. I'm being a little bit careful what I'm saying, not wanting to put words in your mouth, but I just wonder, can you talk a little bit about that specific aspect?
Yeah, generally it works really well. So because these are patient advocates who are members of our SAB, they are already heavily involved in the study. So when it comes to the point of authorship, we're already working really collaboratively with them. So in terms of how we work as a group, that's already been established. Like Sam said, we typically seek feedback from them on topics during SAB meetings. We might then put together an outline for a publication, which we send out to them as their co-authors to seek their feedback. Again, when we come to developing drafts of a publication, it then goes out to all the authors, as you would expect, and they contribute feedback on the drafts. I don't think we've really experienced any challenges. I mean, if anything, it's a benefit to get feedback from the patient advocacy group members, because that layperson's perspective is really important in terms of, is the information that we're communicating coming across well? If we're putting something out there into the literature, we want it to be looked at by key opinion leaders, but also because the patients are contributing so much to our studies, we think that they're obviously going to be interested in the publications output as well. So we want our publications to be accessible and for them to include things that patients are interested in, and to be to talk about it in a way that they understand. So if anything, I think it's a benefit to have their feedback.
Okay, so Q Fulvio, I mean, come in as the patient advocate representative on the SAB. I mean, just talk a little bit about the aspect from your point of view. Comment on what the guys have said. So, from your point of view, how well is it working involving you and your association and the patients? How interested are you, and how effective is it in terms of getting your feedback into the publication process? So, just we're dying minutes, I'm afraid, but just give us a little bit of a viewpoint from your side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I would like to add to the general discussion few points. One, the study is based on different patients-reported outcomes tools. And even if those reported outcomes are targeting specific aspects of the disease, but in a sort, there are some overlaps. So patients that are not really patients or intrusions into the database, I think that it can be really monitored out because of lack of consistencies of the symptoms and of the problems that are suggested and collected by the app. So just to describe how the SAB will be able at the end of the study to look for discrepancies and improper enrollment of subjects. Second, the publications, because of the help of the National Association, for sure will be translated into the national languages in order to facilitate dissemination in each country. We should keep in mind that the general language of scientific publication is English. And so this facilitates in some way, but is not quite useful within all through Italy, just as an example. So it's relevant that the National Association can provide a simplified translation of the message that is disseminated. And the last point is acknowledgement of the patients into the scientific study. As their contributors is coded, we have no way of knowing the names of the person involved in the study. And so probably we have to go again through the association and to ask through the association at the end of the study if each subject that participates in the study is happy to give his full name to the general public, if he wants to have a sort of role that has been outlined by Emma or the other people. That's it.
Okay. I am over time, and I often get to this stage. So I just wanted to ask make a couple of. I mean, it seems to me there's so much we could talk about here, and there's still questions coming in. So I'm sorry, we might have to get you guys back and pick out some of this stuff. A quick question, Mark, maybe just very quickly to you. There's an attraction with rare diseases. I get that, okay, and the difficulty of recruiting and so on. But actually, presumably, anything like this can be applied to anything. I mean, you know, cardiovascular disease or something like that. It sort of doesn't matter how many numbers or where they are. The technology actually just can cope, can't it? So that's just a point I think is quite interesting, because I think people will go, oh, rare diseases, that will be good because we can find people in all parts of the world. But actually, just using platforms like this is going to generate lots of interesting information. Is that just stating the obvious?
That's right. So we've talked about sort of big long-term adapted registries broadly, but there's equally validity in you know, certainly in other indications, but also in really, you know, we can do things really quickly. So if you've got a sort of data gap, maybe, you know, you can do a short gap filling study very quickly, whereas historically that would have taken a lot longer and probably been a lot more expensive as well.
Yeah. Okay, and I can see we've now got conversations going on in the chat room as well. So I think actually what I'm going to do, look, guys, I think this is fascinating, and I'm going to draw a line now. I think it's brilliant. We've had lots of food for thought there. To the audience, I would say, look, some of you have got some specific questions there. Please follow up. Via LinkedIn is the easy way of doing it. Anyone watching this video later on, again, the guys here, we're very happy to hear from you. I do think we might get you back, Mark, and talk about some of this stuff in a bit more detail, because there's so many different aspects to this, which I find absolutely fascinating. So huge thank you to you guys. I'm going to draw the line now. All of you, thank you very much. Audience members, you don't have to rush away. We've still got a few minutes, and I'd still like to have a few minutes of unrecorded time at the end before we stop at the top of the hour. So thank you, everybody. My little plug, obviously, if people are watching this wondering what the heck's going on, I run a lot of this sort of stuff. And if you go to medcommsnetworking.com, you'll find these MedComms webinars and activities, and you'll find the recordings at NetworkPharma TV and so on and so forth. So I'm always happy to hear from anyone, but go to medcommsnetworking.com to find out what's happening and have an explore. The guys here are very happy to hear from you via LinkedIn. That's the easy way. So on that note, I'm just going to say a huge thank you. Stay well, everybody. And if everyone can just give us a little bit of a wave, we'll say goodbye. Thank you very much. Take care.